Hi class, today we're going to talk about the Bronze Age collapse when ancient civilizations fell. So originally I wasn't planning on making this video. We talked about the Bronze Age collapse briefly when we talked about Assyria. We're going to talk about it again when we talk about the Mycenaeans in Greece. But as I studied this, it just became so fascinating and interesting to me, and I think it's really important and relevant in our discussion of ancient history. So there you go. I made a whole video. Hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So we're going to start with review. This is a timeline that I showed you in your last video, chapters 1 through 17 review. I'm not reading all of this. I just wanted to give you a reference for when the Bronze Age collapse happens, which is right here. If you want to pause it and read it all, please be my guest. Okay, before we talk about the Bronze Age collapse, we have to talk about something called the three-age system. So you're not like, the Bronze Age collapse, Mrs. Hernandez, like, why is it called that? What's the Bronze Age? Because we haven't talked about it. So we're going to talk about it now. So ancient history of the Near East is dated using something called the three-age system. And this is based on metals each time period used. So you have the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Stone Age is considered prehistory, before writing. People use stones, bone, wood as tools. Get into the Bronze Age, from 3000 to 1200 BC. People mix copper and tin to make bronze, and they use these for tools and weapons. Around 1200 BC, this is when you have the Bronze Age collapse. Enter into the Iron Age, 1200 to 550 BC. People figured out how to make iron, and they start mass producing tools and weapons. Now, the dates that I'm giving you aren't exact because historians would say each culture entered into these different periods at different times. So like China figured out how to make iron and entered into the Iron Age as a different time than people in Mesopotamia, if that makes sense. So I'm going to tell you what I think about this dating system. You can disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm going to read a verse to you from Genesis. Genesis 4:22 says, Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. Now this is pre-flood. So according to this text, bronze and iron was used much, much earlier than the Bronze Age or the Iron Age. So I personally don't agree with how these time periods are named. So again, I want you to understand that scholars, historians, archaeologists are looking back onto ancient history and saying, how do we categorize and how do we organize these so that they kind of make sense to us? And they were like, hey, well, in this period, people used this, and in this period, people used these metals. And I guess what I don't agree with per se is the concept behind why they're named or dated this way. Is it's using the idea that people were progressing and people were evolving in a sense. So the three-age system does use old Earth dating. And so if you use young Earth dating, then this system, the three-age system, won't work for you. The dating in the Stone Age particularly is based, I would say, in evolution, because you're looking at like, you know, Neolithic man kind of a thing. And I know that there are many wonderful Christians that believe in both old Earth and young Earth, so I'm not taking a position on that per se. I'm just trying to point out like where the three-age system or the thought behind it came from, if that makes sense. So what do we conclude about this? Obviously, you've only heard about it for like 2 minutes, so you can't really formulate your own opinion or conclusion, but I just want to share with you that let's say that even if you don't agree with the evolutionist perspective on why things are dated this way, I think it's still important to understand how historians date and divide different time periods. So that when we're reading these articles or watching these videos, we have that reference. I think it's important to note that there is a transition in using bronze to iron, and that is shown by archaeological evidence. And so even if bronze and iron were used way, way, way before the Bronze and Iron Age, we can still say, okay, bronze was heavily used during the Bronze Age, and then it was heavily used during, or iron was heavily used during the Iron Age. Maybe we don't agree with the concept of like this evolution or this progress being made per se, but you can agree that the Bronze Age was a time when people used more bronze, and the Iron Age was a time when people used more iron. Also want to point out, when I say progress, I'm not saying like human progress. I'm talking about like evolutionary progress. So I also want to point out that there is something unusual that happens between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and it is called the Bronze Age collapse. This is the name that people use, and so I just wanted to explain all this to you so that you understand what we're talking about when we say the Bronze Age collapse, if that makes sense. So that's all I have to say about that. If you want to know more about the 3-age system, please do some research and come to your own conclusions about it. Okay, Bronze Age collapse. This is the fun stuff. Here we go. So the Bronze Age, so before the collapse, 3000 to 1200 BC. The use of bronze during the Bronze Age is very popular. This is when you have the development of civilizations in the Near East. Joshua J. Marks says that civilizations advanced in culture, language, technology, religion, art, architecture, politics, warfare, and trade. So you have a lot of progress happening within humankind. Trade flourished between civilizations, and so the Bronze Age is basically everything that we have studied so far except for the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and Israel as a nation. Okay, so everything else we have studied has been in the Bronze Age. So with that in mind, I want you to understand that the Bronze Age collapse would significantly alter these civilizations and these people's way of life. So when did this happen? Dates, 1200 to 1150 BC. Those are the dates that we're going to use. The dates are very different depending on the source you look at. The history of the ancient world says 1119 to 1032 BC. Regardless, the collapse occurred somewhere between 50 to 100 years. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about like the effects of the collapse. I'm talking about like the actual stuff that like caused the collapse and like when all these civilizations fell. Joshua J. Mark says major cities were destroyed. Whole civilizations fell. Diplomatic and trade relations were severed. Writing systems vanished, and there was widespread devastation and death on a scale never experienced before. Robert Drew says, within a period of 40 to 50 years at the end of the 13th and the beginning of the 12th century, almost every significant city in the Eastern Mediterranean world was destroyed, many of them never to be occupied again. So here I'm giving you these quotes on like the results of the Bronze Age collapse. And this is a big deal. I want you to think about what it would take for writing systems to vanish. Obviously, we live in a different age. Obviously, we have a lot of technology that helps preserve things that people didn't have before. But I want you to think about like the mass scale of destruction and devastation that needs to happen for writing systems to vanish. Like, that's incredible. So let's talk about what happened to the civilizations. So the civilizations that collapsed are the Hittites, the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Kassites in Babylon, the New Kingdom of Egypt. I want to add that Egypt still remains, but the New Kingdom would collapse into the third intermediate period, and its power was lost permanently, kind of like we talked about in our chapters 1 through 17 review. The city-states in the Levant were destroyed. 38 cities in total show layers of destruction during this time. The places that were badly weakened but survived were Egypt, Assyria, the Phoenicians, and Elam. So we had to ask, like, what in the world caused this? And a lot of historians and scholars are in disagreement, or they're a little bit perplexed by it. But these are the widely held theories, I guess. So the possible causes, again, note the word possible causes. This is taken directly from the Ancient History Encyclopedia. Natural catastrophe, such as earthquakes, climate change, which caused drought and famine, internal rebellions, such as class wars, invasions, primarily by the sea people, disruption of trade relations, and system collapse, like political instability. Joshua J. Marks says all of these pressures for the collapse were brought to bear on Mediterranean civilization in quick succession, perhaps almost simultaneously, so that they could not recover from one catastrophe before another was upon them. So I'm sure you all understand what that means, but basically it's not like, oh, an earthquake happened, this is terrible, but like an earthquake happens and now we have drought and famine and now people are rebelling and then now we have the sea people invading and there's all this stuff happening at once or it's overlapping and they couldn't recover from that. Here is a map so you can kind of see the sea people are in the red and the Dorians who we will talk about in our Mycenaean video are in the blue, and you can see all of the red fire cities are the ones that are completely destroyed. Now, I want you to go watch this video called The End of Civilization, The Bronze Age Collapse by Crash Course on YouTube. It's a great video that will give you just a thorough understanding. It'll also give you some more understanding of the sea people, and it'll give you a great analysis at the end. And so go watch this video right now. Okay, so now that you're back, I want you to answer these questions about the video to make sure I know you watched the video. So first, I want you to answer what was the Near East civilization like before the Bronze Age collapse? Describe using examples given in the video. What are some of the theories that caused the Bronze Age collapse? Name them and write one sentence describing them each. How does John Green relate the Bronze Age collapse to today? And then I want you to do this analysis. I want you to make connections between the coronavirus pandemic to the Bronze Age collapse. And I want you to do this through the results or the outcome of each event, not necessarily the event itself. So I don't want you to compare the Bronze Age collapse to the coronavirus pandemic. I want you to compare the outcome of the Bronze Age collapse to some of the results or the outcomes that we are seeing in the coronavirus pandemic. I understand we're still in the pandemic, so we can't see it all, but just write about the things that you know. So what happened after the collapse? Joshua J. Marks says, when the collapse had run its course, the Mediterranean region entered a dark age in which iron replaced bronze as the metal of choice. Diplomatic and trade relations were nearly non-existent, and art and architecture and general quality of life all suffered in comparison with the Bronze Age. He continues, while civilizations rebuilt and developed going forwards, much was lost which could not be replicated. Like, that's really sad. Like, so much destruction and so much happened that all this progress that had been made was lost. So just continuing, what happened during these dark ages, prosperity becomes a thing of the past. And again, like, prosperity of the Bronze Age or these ancient civilizations is astonishing to me when you look at Egypt, when you look at King Tut's tomb. Like, some of these ancient civilizations were very, very powerful and very, very wealthy. This prosperity becomes a memory, and this memory would eventually be turned into myth, specifically like by Homer. Greece would be plunged into the Greek Dark Ages, where no writing would emerge for hundreds of years. We'll talk about this in our Mycenaean video, but people reverted to agricultural lifestyle. You go from having these complex like palaces and governments back to like farming. Linear A and Linear B, which are the writing systems, would fall out of use, and the Phoenician alphabet would end up taking its place. So much progress, again, that has been made ends up being lost. But I want to end on a positive note, and this is my favorite part because I think this is just so mind-blowing. So Joshua J. Marks says, from the ashes of the Bronze Age collapse came the seeds of civilization which would produce the modern world. I'm going to read that again. because it's so good. Okay, listen. From the ashes of the Bronze Age collapse came the seeds of civilizations which would produce the modern world. Eric Klein, I'm going to read a quote from him in just a second. Eric Klein suggests that sometimes it takes a large-scale wildfire to help renew the ecosystem of an old-growth forest and allow it to thrive afresh. So basically what he's saying is that because of this collapse, you have these seeds of civilization start growing. And that growth, those seeds would produce the modern world. Like that's crazy, which I mean, in turn, you have to think like what would have happened if the Bronze Age collapse hadn't happened. But anyway, this is so fascinating to me. So here's a long quote. It's 2 slides by Eric Klein. When the world emerged from the collapse of the Bronze Age, it was indeed a new age, including new opportunities for growth, particularly with the demise of the Hittites and the decline of the Egyptians, who in addition to ruling their own regions, had also between them controlled most of Syria and Canaan for much of the late Bronze Age. Although there was a certain amount of continuity in some areas, particularly with the Neo-Assyrians in Mesopotamia, remember like the Neo-Assyrians were very powerful after the Bronze Age collapse. Overall, it was a time for a new set of powers and a fresh start with new civilizations, including the Israelites, Philistines, Phoenicians in what had once been Canaan, the Neo-Hittites in southeastern Anatolia, North Syria, and points farther east, and the Greeks in geometric, archaic, and then classical Greece. Thus, as other scholars have pointed out, the emergence of the Israelites as well as the Philistines and Phoenicians was made possible in part not only by the collapse of the Canaanite cities, but also by the withdrawal of the Egyptians from Canaan in the decades following the Pyrrhic victory over the Sea Peoples. If it had not been for these conditions and the power vacuum left by the collapse of the great powers, it is much less likely, for instance, that the Israelites would have been able to establish a foothold in the Promised Land. Like that is mind-blowing to me to see, okay, you have this collapse, and because of this collapse, like all the cities in Canaan, like that area, I think all or most of the cities like were just completely destroyed. And because of that, and also because Egypt, who had controlled Canaan, can't control it anymore, and you have the Hittites who were very powerful, like they're completely destroyed, and Assyria, who was powerful, is weakened for about 100 years. Because of all these things, you have this power vacuum, and because of this power vacuum, this little group of people like the Israelites can go in and take the Promised Land. And I think it's okay to speculate and argue, like, did God cause these conditions to allow the Israelites to enter the land, or to make it possible for them to enter the land? But wait, we have to talk about dates first, and I know that's like your favorite thing to talk about. But in our Israelite video, we talked about the Exodus being in the 1400s. Now, the Bronze Age collapse happened in like the 12 to 1100s. So if we're talking about the Israelites entering into the Promised Land after the Bronze Age collapse, doesn't really work out. Or during, I guess, during, after. So I'm going to introduce another theory to you, which I learned about from a YouTube channel called World History by a Jew. He has a whole series on the Bronze Age collapse, and so if you're interested, go check out his channel. Anyway, this is so cool. Okay, so this is the other theory, that the Exodus happened around 1250 BC. And these are the reasons that he argues why the Exodus was during this time and not the 1400s. So the Bible says the Israelites helped build Pithom and Ramses, which are cities. Exodus says, therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. So these cities, the city of Ramses or Ramses, was built as Ramses II's new capital during the 19th dynasty. And so he argues that the Israelites helped build this city. It wasn't built until Ramses II, and then the Exodus happened. which is in the 19th dynasty. Now, there's a counter argument to this on people who agree with the 1400 sides, which I'm not going to get into. Anyway, the city is near Avaris, which is where the Israelites probably were and where the Hyksos were. So now the Bible says the Israelites then fight the Philistines, right? We talked about this. The Philistines are sea people, okay? And they settle after the destruction that they caused, and they settled during or after the Bronze Age collapse. You can't fight people who aren't there. So the theory goes that if the Exodus happened in the 1400s, and then they were 40 years in the desert and they entered into the promised land, the Philistines would not have been there yet, if that makes sense. Also, prior to the Bronze Age collapse, this whole area was controlled by Egypt. Remember, Tutmosis III, just after Hatshepsut, just goes on like 17 campaigns and he takes over this whole area. And if the Israelites were in Canaan at this point, they would have had to fight the Egyptians. And the Bible doesn't say that the Israelites fight the Egyptians in Canaan. So he argues that the Exodus happened around 1250. The Israelites don't have to fight the Egyptians because the Egyptians are no longer in control of this area. I think it's a really fascinating theory, and I think it holds a lot of water. Anyway, to summarize, before the Bronze Age collapse, you have a lot of progress. We studied all of this, guys. Like, there's advances in warfare, in writing, in architecture, in trade, and major civilizations are interconnected. But after the collapse happens, many writing systems vanish. They return to more agrarian societies. Major civilizations are completely gone or they're weakened. And a power vacuum is left for other people groups to emerge, like the Israelites or the Phoenicians or the Philistines. And you just have this dynamic shift where you have these new civilizations emerging that will set the stage for the modern age. Last slide. If you want to just completely nerd out, this is a 6-minute video that shows you the maps from every year of the Bronze Age collapse. You can see Egypt and the Hittites wane in power and Israel emerging at the end. You can even just see the first map and kind of click through and get to the last map, which is what I did. So you can just kind of see how different the world looks after this. So go check that out if you're interested. I hope you found the Bronze Age collapse as interesting as I did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.